this video, we're going to talk about abseiling and the essential skills we need to make sure that we can do this not only safely, but obviously make sure that we can do it, come up with a versatile system that will work for a range of environments. And as you get more skilled and more advanced in what you're doing with your climbing, you'll find other methods and other ways. But I'm going to try and show you this quite simple method, which is quite universal and will apply to a range of different environments, from sea cliffs to mountain crags and all other places. So we're at the top of the crag. We've sorted our anchors out and we've got an abseil rope attached. I think really important part of abseiling is making sure that the anchors or whatever you're going to abseil off is unquestionable. So there's no way at all that it can break or come apart, and that's by using, good gear placement, large gear, or big boulders, huge boulders, wrapping the rope round and attaching that way. And if you're unsure about how to do that, seek some sort of professional instruction so that you know how to do that safely. So once we've set the rope up and we've got it in place and we've got it down the crag, we need to then attach ourselves to the rope. So my preferred method is to extend out using a sling, and I'm going to put my lanyard through the top of my harness and bring it all the way down, and then I'm going to lark's foot it through my harness. I think it's worth mentioning as well, every manufacturer has a different recommendation on how you tie in with this method. Some harnesses, you've got to do it with the belay loop and lark's foot it. Other manufacturers recommend you go through there. So make sure you check the owner's manual of the harness that you're using before you pick which method to use. It's quite important. Once I've done that, I want to put a knot in my sling, probably about a third of the way up. And then sometimes I'll put another one in, just so it gives me a few options to shorten the sling up if I need to. So first of all, I'm going to take my safety lanyard and I'm going to connect it to an anchor on the abseil, and that's just to make sure that I'm looking after my own personal safety near the edges. And then that means I can move towards the edge knowing that I'm safely anchored in. Also, we need to consider the lanyard is static, it's not dynamic, they don't have shock absorption, so we want to make sure that's tensioned at all times. We don't want to be leaving loads of slack on there, as if you fall onto a slack lanyard, it can damage the lanyard, so making sure we do that. The next thing I like to do is get my prusik on first, just so I can test that the prusik works. So I'm going to pull up a little bit of rope. Bearing in mind on a longer abseil, say 50 or 60 metres, there might be a lot of rope out, so trying to pull all that to put in your abseil device can be quite hard. So putting the prusik on first, and then I normally go for 3 or 4 wraps with my prusik, and then attach it into my belay loop on my harness. And then I can test that that's working by giving it a good tug away to make sure it's locking in. By doing that as well, I've created a little bit of slack here, which enables me to load the abseil plate in a little bit easier. So I'm going to put my abseil plate on this first loop that I've created, push the rope inside the device. Great stuff, and then I can pull some of the rope through and slide this up so it's all locked in place. And what I want to try and do is get all of the weight onto my prusik and onto the abseil plate, just so I can check everything and make sure I've got sufficient distance between my prusik and the belay plate, which I have. I've got about 1.5 inches, 2 inches there, which is fine. And make sure that the lanyard's a little bit slack here so that I can test the system and make sure everything's perfectly in place. Before you take the lanyard off, if you're going to go hands-free, always back up the end of the rope with a knot, just if you're checking everything out, but I always keep one hand onto there. Once I've checked my system, I can remove the lanyard. And if you're abseiling into a crag where you need to do a hanging belay, these lanyards are really good when you're hanging, sort of when you get down to the belay and you build it, you can clip yourself on quite easily with that as well. So I'll just clip that onto the top of there, doesn't need to be done up, just out of the way. Another consideration when you're abseiling is just about whether you put a knot in the end of your rope or not. So in some instances, if I can see the bottom of my abseil and I can see that the rope has landed in a pile at the bottom of that ledge, I won't put a knot in. And that's because sometimes when you put a knot in the end of a rope, if it goes into the sea, the knot can actually trap underneath on a cove or on the sea cliff, and it can jam the rope and stop it from you being able to abseil down a tension rope. So if I can see the platform at the bottom and I can see there's no chance of me abseiling off the end of the rope, then I won't put a knot in. For all of the circumstances where I can't see where the rope's touching, I will always put a knot in the end of the rope and make sure it's a good knot, like a double fisherman's knot, to ensure that you don't abseil off the end of a rope when you're going down. Once I've done that, I've checked all my system from here down to here, so I checked that the belay device has been loaded in, correct orientation, screw gate's done up, my knot's in the sling, comes down to my harness, locks footed into there, distance is appropriate, and the screw gate's done up. Once I've done all those checks, I can take that off and I can start to move backwards towards the edge of the crag and start the abseil. A little tip for abseiling is just keep your feet about shoulder width apart, making sure that you've got a bit more stability. If you keep your legs quite narrow together, it can be a bit awkward. And then you're just leaning back. And then as you go over the edge, making sure the rope is protected on any sharp edges. In this instant, we've got a nice smooth surface here. Not worried about any crystals or any damage to the rope, but if there was any sharp edges, protecting the rope with a rope protector is key. And if at any point on the descent you need to take your hand off, for example, to free out a trapped rope or abseil rope, always make sure you back this up with either a knot or 3 wraps around the leg. If you're going to use your hands, take your hands off.